Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you all again today. Um, Daniel is not with us this evening. He's needing to take a little bit of personal time, and we definitely respect that. Um, you know, as an encouragement to anybody else out there, when you find yourself working with ministry, and you find yourself reaching a certain point, even Jesus, through his ministry, found times where he just had to get away to recharge, to to and that's why we encourage. That's why we stand behind Daniel this evening. We do pray with him, and we also encourage those who work either in ministry, if you work, volunteer in your church, anytime anytime at all that you find yourself in a position where you're feeling a little burned out and you need to recharge, never, ever feel ashamed to go to your leadership and say, I need to take a breather. I need just to breathe for a little bit. It's a great thing. We go back to a very basic thing. The world was created in 6 days, and on the Sabbath day, it says that God rested, that this was a day of rest. Even God rested from his work. He took a pause to recharge. And if God needed to, quote, recharge, and we know God is all powerful and he didn't have to, but he did it as an example to us that there are times when we need to take a moment and we need to recharge. So take God's example. If you need to recharge for a little bit, man, do that. Strongly encouraged, and most every minister that you deal with will tell you the same thing. As you see, our topic this evening, our topic, I'm not good enough to be a Christian. Kind of an interesting concept, and I say that in a general sense, but when you really think deeply, and I believe that after I share my heart with you just a little bit this evening, that you might look at it the same way. The statement is not meant to be something that tears us down, but it's made as an encouragement. It's made as an encouragement to take a look that it's not because of us, but it's because of the gift that God has given to us. That is the gift of his Son, the gift of his Son's death, the blood that he shed to freely give us the life that was lost in the Garden of Eden. Now, it does take a little bit of a different view because so many times it is our own self-talk that tells us, I'm not good enough to be a Christian. And sometimes there are unbelievers out there that want to feel the same way. They feel that Christians, they just, the real Christians, they just have it all together. And you know what? I don't have it all together. There's no way that I could be a Christian. I'm not good enough to be a Christian. Well, if you've been telling yourself that, I'm just here to proclaim to you that there is not a single person alive who's good enough to be a Christian. And if you're focusing on just what seems to be this perfect little mask that you see some Christians wear, well, first and foremost, you're definitely not going to my church because, do some people still have those masks? Of course, it's our human nature. But I sit under a pastor that I love dearly, and he will stand on the pulpit. He will stand behind that pulpit, and he will say, the pastor of the church, he will openly comment about ways that he's failed God, not 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, before he was saved. He will talk about places where he's fallen short in the last few days. Now, some would say, well, why would you want to follow somebody like that? Well, it's not that I'm following my pastor. It's he's being open so that when there are new believers that they've committed themselves to Christ for the first time ever, and something happens and they fail and they goof up and they start, and it starts beating themselves in the head. See, I'm just not good enough to be a Christian. Oh, man, I can't believe I was in traffic and I got mad at the vehicle in front of me. They weren't going fast enough. And man, I guess I'm just not good enough to be a Christian. And and then they come to church on Sunday and my pastor starts talking about, I was in traffic the other day and these people just would not go, and I'm wanting to lay on the horn. That person starts going, whoa. Had it all together, but he's just like me. I'm just like him. And I see that God still uses them. That God still uses my pastor in spite of his human frailties. And it becomes an encouragement to those of us in the congregation. Too many churches, the pastors and the leadership, they want to play themselves off. And yes, I put it that way. They want to play themselves off as having it all together. If you're in a church, I'm going to get some enemies. I'm going to get some bad comments off of this. But you know what? I believe in telling the truth. If you're going to a church where your church leadership wants to play it off that they've got it all together, you're going to the wrong church. I'm just going to be real about it. You're going to the wrong church. You see, I can say with certainty and not in self-condemnation that I'm not good enough to be a Christian. You're not good enough to be a Christian. If it was about me being good enough, I'd never make it. But I want to encourage you with a few things. King David, when you read about the life of King David, he was probably one of the most sinful men you will read about in Scripture. But he was used of God. He was the one that it was said about him that he was a man after God's own heart. But this was also the same man who peered upon Bathsheba bathing and put the plan together and got her into the palace. And I hope kids ain't listening. If they are, parents kind of hold their ears for a moment. He brought her into the palace and he had sex with another man's wife. And then had the husband killed. Is this the kind of person you would think is a man after God's own heart? No, if we just looked at it like that. But what made David a man after God's own heart was not that he was perfect or good enough. But when the prophet came to David and Nathan stood before him boldly, and he said to him, "You're the man. You did this thing that you just said, put him to death with Bathsheba and to Uriah." And what made David a man after God's own heart is that when he was confronted with his failures, he immediately repented. That's what made David a man after God's own heart. I was reminded as I was kind of going through this, there was an old I had heard it years ago, and I looked it up, and I found it, and I do have the link to the story right down below in the comments section. Uh, the anecdote is referred to as a pastor's resume. Let me just share it with you for a moment. Maybe some of you have heard it, and maybe you've never heard it. And I'm going to interject. I'll tell you where I'm going to interject a little bit. It's not in the story. Again, the link's down in the comments section. Feel free to click on it and go look it up as well. But it talks about, a church was in need of pastor for some time, but they were having trouble getting one. Not because pastors weren't applying, but because the congregation always seemed to find fault with the pastors. Most pastors were rejected when the people just read the resume. Some didn't have enough experience, some too much, some not enough education, some too much, and so on and so on. They just couldn't find that perfect Christian. That's added thought into it. It says one day, a board member who was getting very tired of this, he decided to do something. So the next Sunday, he got up on the pulpit and announced that he had another resume to share with the congregation. Most of them sat back, folded their arms, and began to listen, ready to see what faults they could find on the new applicant. The board member began to read, and the resume went like this. Quote, "Dear church members, I'm writing to apply for a position as your pastor. My experience is more along the lines of evangelist, but I believe I could fill your position adequately. I've never attended any Bible school per se, but I have a lot of field experience. I don't have a degree on my wall, or even a wall for that matter. I've traveled around most of my life, renting, doing odd jobs to support myself, and preaching wherever I was invited. Churches, streets, even jails. As a matter of fact, I've been thrown in jail several times and have been involved in a few public square squabbles. I've been accused of being anti-Semitic, anti-authority, and causing disturbances almost everywhere I go. But I did have a few conversions to Christianity during my ministry, as well as a few healings. Thank you for considering my application." Now, most of the people looked up at the deacon with smirks of condemnation while others chuckled out loud. One man stood up and, still laughing, asked the deacon, "Does this guy actually expect us to seriously consider him for our pastor? Just what's this fellow's name anyway?" Why, that the letter was signed the Apostle Paul. You could have heard a pin drop. You see, when you just look on the surface, and this didn't even go into it, pardon me, please, before Paul's conversion, he actually killed Christians. Maybe not by his own hand, but he sure made sure, he was the one that carried the letters that put him in jail so that they could be killed. When the deacon Stephen was martyred, he was stoned to death. It says that he was called Saul at the time, said he was standing right there with the group. He was holding their jackets and coats while they murdered Stephen. He was standing right there, and he was in total approval of it. Now, I'm going to tell you what, if I'm looking on the surface, there's no way whatsoever I would look at a person like the person that Saul was prior. I would never, ever look at him and go, "Oh yeah, he's going to be a Christian one day. Yep. Oh man, he's got it all down pat." And it was sort of the same feeling after his conversion. And God spoke to a man of God and said, "This Saul of Tarsus, he's coming in. And the guy goes, "You mean the guy that's killing us and putting us in jail? You're sending him to my place?" Oh, yeah, right, God. But God confirmed his word to him, says, he's going to go through a lot for my name's sake. And even though he wasn't good enough to be a Christian, he became the apostle to the Gentiles, writer of nearly half of our New Testament. The person that if you looked at him, you would have never thought he would have been a Christian. Saul definitely wasn't good enough by man's standards. But God knew exactly what it was going to be about. I as I've hashtagged in the comments, I had the opportunity to see the new film from PureFlix, The Case for Christ. The Case for Christ was a book that was written by Lee Strobel. The book itself was written as under apologetics. It's a big fancy word. It's where we get apology from, but apologetics in its original, this was the term that was used by the Apostle Peter when he said, always be ready to give a defense for what you believe. That's paraphrased, of course, but that's what apologetics is. It happens in many things. So we specify Christian apologetics, which is what Mr. Strobel is a part of. And the original book, The Case for Christ, is a great book on apologetics. I'll kind of describe it a little bit through this discussion on it. But it comes from Greek terms apologia, logia. Logia is a variation of the term logos, which many of us have heard, and it just means a ready defense, a counter debate. It comes from debating terms and discussion terms. If you kind of picture, going back to Paul for a moment, when he went to Mars Hill, and he raised his hand and he spoke. And after he spoke, they said, "You know what? Why don't you come back tomorrow and tell us more?" He was giving an apologia, an apology about the Christian faith there on Mars Hill. The story of Lee Strobel, which there was a movie that was produced long ago that basically just took what he had written in the book and put it in a video format. But this film, The Case for Christ, 2017, it's a PureFlix production. I personally got it from Redbox. Hey, if you're listening to this down the road, it probably won't be in Redbox anymore. But the 2017 version, instead of it being about the book and putting it into a visual format, it was actually the story of Lee Strobel's progression from being an atheist, a very professed atheist, to actually becoming a believer. And this trip, this journey that he took on that was actually it was the material that became the book, The Case for Christ. Lee Strobel, late 70s, early 80s, he was actually a newspaper reporter, and he actually was working in the legal department, so he was very big about the facts. Don't tell me about feelings. I want facts. I want proof. I want all of this in the movie. But where it connects in is when you watch the movie as an atheist who set out to absolutely prove Christianity to be fake, false, and a lie. Lee Strobel was one of the biggest jerks you would ever hear. Now, don't take that out of context. This was while he was still an atheist. He was not a believer at that time. I'm watching how he was, and yeah, here we go. Here's my faults. I literally wanted to reach into the movie and choke him out. That's how bad he was. Horrible how he acted. But then as he went through the facts, and he traveled around the country talking to experts, putting it together, and he actually finally came to the conclusion at the end that the facts proved that Christianity was real, that the resurrection of Christ was real. Long time studying on it. And today, you can still hear from him. Lee Strobel is a huge name in Christian apologetics. He, as well as people like Josh McDowell. And it's so amazing when it comes to apologetics side. It's some of the best apologetics. Some of the greatest ones that we hear about today are people who actually tried to prove Christianity wrong. As anti-God as you can get. So you can definitely say, well, they sure weren't good enough to be a Christian. But God saw them differently. And it doesn't end just because we've accepted Christ. Like my pastor, I still struggle day in and day out. There's an old cliche that you hear in certain churches. It says, it's not my brother, it's not my sister, but it's me standing in need of prayer. Peter is a great example. And I'm not talking about his denial of Christ at the trial. You fast forward. And after Paul has been ministering and preaching, it says that Peter came to Galatia. Cool. Peter was sitting down we gonna keep it modern. Man, he was partying with the Gentiles. He was reveal my age a little bit here. He was partying like it was 1999. He was having a blast. Never had an issue. This is the same guy that God gave the vision of the meat and the food coming down in the cloth. Can't eat of this, it's unclean. And God said, what I've sanctified, don't you dare call it unclean and impure. Because Peter was then sent to minister to the Gentile Cornelius. His entire household was saved. Now understand, some of you may not realize that for a Jew to fellowship, to sit down and eat with a Gentile, was very, very, very negatively looked upon. Kicked him out of the synagogue. Apologies again. I had a long weekend. I do apologize, folks. So what happened was, all of a sudden, a bunch of Jews showed up to see what was going on. And when they did, Peter separated himself from the Gentiles and went and hung out with the Jews. Hey, this is my clique. I'm going to go hang out over here. And Paul called him out on it. Paul called him out on it. Peter, you've done wrong. Before they got here, you was partying with all of us. Now that they got here, you too good to hang out with us? You see, Peter still messed up. And he was an apostle. He was a leader in the church. So if you're even a believer, Even as a believer, you may find times where you mess up and you go, I'm just not good enough to be a Christian. I quit. Don't ever think that. You with a certain thought, and it comes from the movie Wonder Woman. Wow, he's quoting all kinds of movies. Hey, if it's a good quote and it applies, I'm going to use it. But in the movie Wonder Woman, there's a group of them. You know, they're kind of hanging out to toast. I want you to remember this in the concept of I'm not good enough, because we're not. They put it so well. They said, "May we get what we want, and may we get what we need. Never get what we deserve." You see, every single one of us, I don't care whether you've accepted Christ already, into this, because somehow God led you to this particular video. He led you to this video, and you've put up with all the rest of my stuff just to hear this one thing. You see, why I can say that I'm not good enough to be a Christian is just like that quote: if I got what I deserved, I would deserve hell from God for eternity. That's what I deserve, because I've not done anything good enough to merit his favor. He gave me what I needed when his son bled and died on that cross. And for you who are believers listening to this, way too far, you've not fallen too far from God. The prodigal son, it had been, I'm guessing it had been years since he had left, since he had ran away from his father. And yet when his father saw him returning, he was right there, and he never scolded him. He never mistreated him. He said, my son was dead, but he's alive again. You see, you've not fallen too far from God. He's just waiting to see you moving back toward him, you coming back home. Because he wants to give you the fine robe, and he wants to put that ring of authority back on your finger. And he wants to throw a big party to let everybody know, my child's back. My child's back. I'm going to make this one short. And it's so similar, whether you've fallen away from God, if you've never been a part of this family, then it's real simple. God, I've messed up. God, I've made mistakes. But God, I know that your forgiveness is stronger and bigger than my mistakes. I accept your forgiveness. Lead me where I need to go. And if that's the sincere prayer of your heart, if that's sincerely how you call out to God, wanting to start a new path, he's heard it, he's accepted it, and now you're part of the family, and now you're back home. Tickle pink, we are happy as can be, man. If you had never been a part of this family before, I want you to know that there's a party like you ain't never ever thought about among the angels right now, because you accepted the promise. And if you had stepped away, if you had walked away, if you had turned your back on God, there's just as much of a party because you've come back. And he throws a feast for it. If that's touched if either of those points has touched you, hey, you can leave us a comment here down below in the comment section. We've got we got the address for a Facebook page. Come by, let us know personally into the family. We want man, church, we say we just want love on you for a little bit. Because that is so much of what the family is about. It says that they'll know us because of our love. And man, that's what we want to show is love. That's what we want to show with you. We want to share with you. We want you to introduce yourself to the family. And man, we just so look forward to it. We got to take care of as I say, got to take care of the groceries. If you've really enjoyed what you've heard tonight, look for other videos. If you don't, it's real simple. You got that subscribe button just right down below me. You can't see me pointing at it, but I'm pointing at it. It's right over there. Hit that subscribe button. And then make sure that you hit that bell so that you receive notifications. We work to do this every Monday night, but if anything ever changed, or instead of doing a live event like this, if we do other videos, that's going to let you know that our stuff is up. Man, want you to know that we love y'all. To spending this time with you next week. Say hey. We want to. Last big old good time. Until then, until next week, Berean, y'all know.